Hello, I'm Steven Dickens from Future and Research. Best bit of advice, add value to your clients. That sounds simple, but think about how you can add value when there's not a deal, when there's not a transaction, whether that's sending pieces of content that you think they might find interesting, connecting them to industry peers. Think about how you can add value because the next time you do have to engage with them, they're going to see you as that person who's thinking about them, thinking about their business, and genuinely trying to add value.
That's some simple advice, but hard in practice. So where did you learn that, Stephen, or when did you learn that in your career?
Hey, Phil, thanks for having me on the show again.
Yeah, buddy.
I think I've just picked it up along the way. Nobody's told me to do it. I did this. I do this pretty regularly. I'll see something. Maybe I was chatting to a client 6 months ago. They were telling me that they were focused on a particular topic or issue. I'll see it in the news, see something on one of my social feeds, and I'll just ping them and go, FYI. Not looking to sell, not looking to drive an engagement, not trying to schedule an appointment. Purely it's a case of, saw this, thought you might find it interesting. Maybe they respond, maybe they don't. Don't follow up and sell. I mean, if you end up in a back and forth and they're like, hey, I've been thinking about you, we should really get back on. I mean, yes, obviously. But don't use it as a way to trigger a sales conversation. And then do it again. Don't obviously do it like 5 times in a week and become a stalker. But if it's genuinely on topic, just send it. The amount of times I interact with clients 3, 4, 5 months later, they're like, that article you sent me was really useful. Thank you for doing that. And then you end up having a really productive conversation. So it's a way to keep a relationship going in between transactions. And it's a way to add value. It also puts you in the context of somebody who's genuinely trying to add value to your client, rather than just always trying to sell them something.
That's, I used to do that in the good old days when we had newspapers, right? I'd clip out an article and say, hey, Stephen, I was thinking about you. This made me think of you. And I did that initially, right, when social media became big, but I haven't done that in a while. And I think that is good practice. You said, though, people too. So how do you balance the connection need? Because I like to do this too, but I've been told, well, I want to give you permission before you connect to me. How do you balance that, Stephen, with adding value and yet not being over the top?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, if you're connected with them on LinkedIn or Twitter or one of the platforms, then it's super easy. Just slide it into a DM and off you go. And as I say, do not add anything salesy around it. Just go, hey, saw this, thought you might find it interesting. Or even just FYI. Everybody's busy. Everybody's getting bombarded on every different platform they're on. So you've got to be super respectful there. But I think it's just, once you've got that connection, that's fine. If it's in a pure new business context, that's obviously harder. I mean, I'm seeing LinkedIn being really hard to get somebody to strike a new connection. If somebody's got some tips and tricks that they want to share and you want to come on your show, I'd love to hear them. But getting new people to connect is really hard.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, right? New people are always hard. The only trick, I guess, that I've found is you have to find someone that's in common to make that connection for you, right? To ask for a referral. That's probably the most effective way that I've seen to do that. Because insight, to your point, right? It seems like, who the heck are you? Why are you sending me this? Right? I know you're trying to help, but that's nice. The other thing that I've done, right, is because I have a show and I am genuinely interested in smart people, right? I'll invite them on the show. And sometimes, that's a good way to connect as well. And that's my lead, right? Like, hey, I've been watching your stuff and let's be clear, this isn't a tactic. This is like legit. Like, I do follow people's feeds. I do pay attention. If they come up a couple times, then I send them a connection request. Then I invite them for a 15-minute call, right? Then I invite them to more. Even if, I've no desire to sell to them, but adding value, right, is important. I think that's really a good takeaway.
And I
Steven.
do the same. I've got a podcast show that I do for the Linux Foundation. I've had people on there, and obviously I'd like to sell to them at some point, but you've got to distance yourself from adding value and sales, because if you don't, the customer sees it as a tactic, exactly as you described. It's got to be there's got to be a distance between it. So I'll have people on the show. We'll talk afterwards. I'm like, fantastic, great, thanks. If you want to connect in, you've got to stop that bit of adding value and have it independent of the sales conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Great advice. Great advice. So with that, right, we want to talk about a big deal mindset today. So let's start, because I think that value, I think that's a good place to start here with a big deal mindset. So Steven, how do you define a big deal mindset?
Well, I'd kind of almost start by defining it what it's not. I see an increasing focus on the metrics and what I call the science of selling, whether that's cadence, whether that's using tools like Medic and Scotsman, and whatever metrics. The CRM tools have taken us to this point. There's some great value for sales people and sales managers in CRM tools as kind of repositories for customer information. Forecasting's got better. It's only 300. It's only 300 times you have to update a spreadsheet now, not over 1,000 times. So things have got better. But I mean, I joke, but I think what I've seen is lazy sales managers, and maybe sales managers who aren't adding a lot of value, thinking that process is the only thing they need to focus on. And then as you go through deal size, that problem gets exponentially worse. So if you're selling SaaS subscriptions for 10K a month, it's relatively easy to go through those processes, and it becomes numbers, and it becomes dials, and it becomes outreaches, and how many times did you touch clients? And I can see that, you've got to sort of think about that. If you're trying to close a $50 million deal, it's nothing about that. Yes, you've got to know where you are in the sales process. Yes, you've got to know who your stakeholders are. Yes, you've got to know where the budget is. Yes, you've got to know where paperwork is. But you could be talking about, and I've been involved in 18-month, 2-year sales cycles. You're not doing weekly updates on an 18-month sales cycle. So I think the big deal mindset for me is almost what it's not as much as what it is. It's not being pulled into that kind of noisy, updating CRM type mindset. It's having the time to think and strategically plan and get ready for what could be an 18-month, 2-year sales cycle.
Wow. Okay. So longer sales cycle. Not those frequent touches every week. I mean, if we stretch that out 18 months, that'd be like 75 pings that are maybe value added, maybe not. That's interesting that we don't do. So, but I do agree with what you said in that we still have to know our mile markers, right? We still have to know, okay, so where are we? We can't get lost there. So I think that's good. So when we have that, I mean, do you think we resist that because of sales managers, because of metrics, or just because it's habit, or what?
Well, I think, the typical seller's got, and I'm talking about enterprise sort of B2B here. You've probably only got 1 or 2 really big deals in your pipe. And then you've got a bunch of medium deals, and then you've got a bunch of small transactional deals. They probably need a different mindset for each one. The smaller transactional, maybe it's an upgrade, maybe it's a renewal. It's coming. You do your process, you get it done. Medium-sized ones, that's probably where those processes and those tools like Medic are probably best. The big deal mindset, however, is more about, for me, engaging senior executives. How do you map their C-suite to your C-suite? How deeply do you understand the customer, and what's your intimacy than the customer? Than it is about process and steps. I mean, At the end of the day, if you're doing a massive deal, you'll be talking to a senior executive. They can pull the process through pretty quickly. So yes, you've got to know who's got to sign on what document, and yes, you've got to know budget levels, and yes, got to know the sign-off procedure. I'm not saying you get to skip those just because you're doing a big deal, but if you're working with the CTO or the CIO or other members of the C-suite, they'll guide you through that and they'll pull you through that process. And if you struggle, and if you've built the right level of empathy, then they'll crash through their organization for you and get it done for you. I remember getting a purchase order on the 20th of December at 9 o'clock of an evening on the last working day from a CTO, because we built the deal together and he's like, I've got it. I'll get it you by the end of the day. Well, his end of the day was 9 o'clock because it was the last day before Christmas. And I'm there sort of sweating. But because we built the rapport, because we'd done the work, I didn't really have to worry about it. Once he sends you an email, you have it by the end of the day. I knew it was in the bank. My procurement people were sweating. But if you've built that value add and you've built that relationship over the period of time, he said, my last email of the day, here you go. Great working with you. Speak to you in the new year. So, he's prepared to work on a Friday night at 9 o'clock at night to get me that PO. Medic's not going to cover that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Right. For sure. That's the unexpected and the unexplainable. And yet, to your point about empathy, I think that's really important, right? We want to build certainly a real relationship with folks, not some fake relationship. So let's talk about empathy, because I think that's often overlooked. People talk, it's because it's not check the box, right? Oh, yep, I was empathetic. That's good. I'm done. Right. So let's talk about that, Steven. How do you define empathy?
Well, I mean, for me, it's being able to put yourself in the mind of your customer. That deal I was just talking about, one of the key steps was we were selling a warehouse management solution. So we're going to re-architect for this retailer how they would pick and pack in the warehouse. And I said, well, I'm selling you this stuff. I've never been to your warehouse. I come to your corporate offices. I said, can I come for a day and do a tour of the warehouse? Because I just want to see what this solution is going to have as an impact on those kind of people we're talking about. They kind of paused and went, yeah, we can sort that out if you like. Because I'd spent a day on the shop floor, because I'd walked around with the people with the tablets, because I'd seen the amount of time, and we'd done a time and motion study and we'd done all the work, but because we were able to see the actual impact, when I got back, I'm able to go, yeah, I spent a day, I see how much of a nightmare the current process is. And I built that level of empathy with the client. And in a lot of cases, they'd not been to the warehouse. So you're kind of one step ahead of them. Some of the technical people in the buying committee hadn't been to the warehouse. So we're buying warehouse management kind of re-engineering software and re-architecting that whole platform, but they hadn't been to the warehouse. So I'm kind of up on them because I've got more empathy with the solution than they have, and they're in the buyer. So I think it's kind of sitting back and the net of that story is, how do I see this through the customer's perspective? How do I put myself into their shoes?
Yeah, that's so good, man. That's so good. So Dan Gentry here says, right, that real connection is so valuable. And I totally agree, right? And it's often difficult to try to make sure that we get that because we're so busy, to your point, Steven, about, okay, I got to check this box. Okay, done. All right, I got to check this box, done. If we just pause for just a minute there and we actually connect and we listen, I think that also develops our empathy, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think sales has become so much of a scientific approach, and there's so many things and boxes to fill in and reviews to do with management. There's not the time to sit down and go, how do I actually get this customer to spend $50 million with me? What's going to and salespeople will say they have thinking time and they'll say they think about it, but that could be if you're selling $50 million, it could be getting your team in a room for 3 days and wallowing in the thinking. If it's that big a deal, getting a team of 6 or 7 people in a room together and guiding them through the process of where are we? What do we need to do? Who are the stakeholders? What could go wrong? And really spending time. That's a different thing than the sort of the tasks you have to do on a mid-size and a small deal, because you genuinely don't have time to do that level of thinking.
Yeah, for sure. It's not an hour. It's a day. It's a couple of days. I think that's so true, right? And that's, you get a whiteboard, right? You start mapping it out. Like, where are we going here? To your point, like, what's the risk if it doesn't go for them? Because often inertia is what prevents them from moving forward. They're happy. They're satisfied where they are, but you got to help them move, right? You got to help them see the benefit of that motion, of that transformation. Not today, maybe not even this quarter, not this year even, but overall, this has got to impact their business. And your point about a warehouse, right? That could be massive transformation.
Well, and I think the other thing to think about is, if you're getting customers to spend that amount of money, and I'm talking tens of millions of dollars here for these deals, they're making a career-defining bet on you in a lot of cases. So it's not does the solution tick the box? Does it do what? Do I believe the ROI? Yes, those are important things, but it comes down to, if I'm going to place $50 million with Steven and his organization, that might be the biggest purchase order I place for 3 years. Everybody's going to know I championed that solution. And then if it does work, I'm going to be a hero. And everybody's going to think, this was the best strategic thing we've done. But the flip side of that is, they're also going to think, if it doesn't work, that's the guy who spent $50 million with that vendor who never delivered.
Yeah.
So
wow.
It goes beyond just, is there product market fit? Does your thing do what it says? You've got to put yourself in the mind of, would you make that decision if the tables were turned, and what would you need in order to make a career-defining bet?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think
Medic doesn't cover that.
No, for sure.
It doesn't, and I'm picking on Medic, and there's hundreds of those types of.
Yeah, Challenger. None of those cover that. I think that's totally right. So okay, so putting ourselves in their shoes, I got that right. And what's the impact? And then your point about, would I make this decision, is great. So how do we do that? How do we de-risk that so that it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, right? This is going to blow up.
Well, I think so. That's multifaceted. So many people are in the product sale mindset. Does my solution do what this customer needs? And if they're making a career-defining bet, they want to be covered. They want to know about support. They want to know what goes wrong in the mid. If something goes bump in the middle of the night, who do I call? They want to maybe be introduced to people in the support organization. They need their executives to have the telephone numbers and recognize faces of other executives, because salespeople move around in organizations. It's thinking about some of those intangible pieces. I did a deal with a Jamaican bank probably a couple of years ago now. And the sales team were doing a great job. They'd got it to the 1 yard line, and it just seemed to have tailed and stopped. And I said, guys, this is a re-engineering of their entire back-end banking infrastructure. The CIO's not going to be able to get that done on their own. Yes, they're ultimately the decision maker, but the board needs to sign off on this. And it wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about budgets. It was just, somebody in the board needs to know that the company's got their back, that if this goes wrong, and I said, you don't have anybody senior enough from our company involved in that deal. And it's not about whether you can close it or I can close it. And it's not about any of that. They want to have a relationship with somebody who's a senior vice president, general manager, because they're making a career-defining bet on a piece of technology. And they want to know that if the salesperson leaves, which will happen, they've got somebody they can pick up the phone to and go, this is going wrong. Can you help me?
Wow.
The intangibles.
Yeah.
So you've got to think about, it's not objections to buying, it's thinking wider than that of all of the reasons why somebody's going to make a career defining decision. Because they make that decision once every 5 or 6 years.
If
I mean,
that.
if
If that. Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting and so true. So covering off executives, pairing them up is not just a show of I can play chess. It's really a show of you've got the support of, if your CIO is involved, our CIO is involved. If your CFO is involved, right? So pairing that up so that they know that it's someone at their level they can escalate to. And I've certainly seen deals where, they send in 2 junior folks and they just end up going sideways because that just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I mean, you can be the person who's got the relationship with the CIO and CTO, or even the boardroom as a seller, but they know you're trying to sell something. They know a senior exec. Yes, they're going to have quotas, but they're representatives of the company more than any seller's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's a longer view, right? Longer look there than just I'm getting paid, right? Just great, I get the commission. That's great. But beyond that, you have to really think about that because attrition matters, right? Dan's got another good point here about that, right? That attrition happens in the corporate world. Absolutely does. Absolutely does. So okay. So we close that big deal, Steven. What else? What else do sellers need to think about to kind of keep that mindset on? Right. We got the deal. So now what?
Not running away and spending the paycheck. And I mean that really bluntly. You've got to show to the client that you're going to be there through the implementation of the project. You're going to be the project manager of your organization's engagement, because they'll want to buy something else. There'll be some upgrade. There'll be some change of scope. There'll be something else. If you're the salesperson who banks that big check from that Uber deal that's 3x the size of your annual quota and you just disappear, they won't they'll be annoyed that you did that, and they won't come back and buy the upgrades from you. And that's really hard to fight as a mindset of, I'm done now. I've been chasing this for 18 months. I've got to stick with this client. So there may not be any money for another 12 months. But if you do, and you do stick with it, then the big upgrade comes, the additional project, the, hey, we bought this in one business unit, come and help this other business unit. They come. So adding value in between the sales is hard to do because you've got other things to do, but just turning up for the weekly status call, making sure your face is there, making sure you're still turning up to the client. It doesn't have to be as frequently, but just making sure that you're still engaged and they still see your face on the weekly progress call, and that you haven't just dipped out and gone and bought the Porsche and the Rolex and disappeared into the sun, or, into the sunset. That's really valuable, because what that means to the client is, we went on a journey together and you're prepared to stay with me on the journey even after the transaction.
Yeah, which is ultimately, they want to know that they've still got your support, not just the support of someone that they just met. That connection totally matters. So with that, Steven, what are we missing, man? What did I not ask? What else plays into this big deal mindset so we can make sure that we think bigger and we do it right?
I mean, I think it boils down to, sales is as much an art as it is a science. We've over-focused on the science. We've over-focused on metrics. We've over-focused on some of the activity vanity metrics, as I call them. How many dials you did this week, how many emails you sent, how many proposals, how many webinars did your clients attend. That's all important for those smaller and mid-sized deals. And the process of something like a medic or a challenger is equally valuable. I think it's being able to acknowledge when to turn off that noise and be able to focus on sitting back and understanding where you are in some of these big deals, and that the process is going to be ridiculously different than it is for those smaller and medium-sized deals.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That quote I just put up on the screen there, sales is as much of an art as a science, right? We've over-focused on the science. I think that's so valuable. Shifting our mindset here with the big deal from just checking the box to really adding value and being present and listening and having empathy, not just because it's good to do, but because it's the right thing to do. And it's the only way we make these deals work. And these 18-month crazy big deal cycles that maybe hit one or two in your career, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still connected to customers that I've done big deals with from many, many, many years ago because they know you stuck with them and they know they backed you for that career-defining decision. That extends beyond I've left those companies a decade ago. They've still got those connections. So if you look back and go, could I speak to a customer 10 years from ago from a completely different job and get a connection from them on LinkedIn? That's maybe the litmus test of whether you actually build a long-standing relationship.
That's good, right? If they can, or they can make that referral for you into an organization, right? We talked about that at the beginning. The best way to get new connections is through existing connections.
For sure.
That's good stuff. So, Steven, if people want to get to know you more, read some of your research, read some more of your work, where do you want to send them? Where should they go?
I think I'm probably, as you well know, Phil, the most contactable person on the internet. So Steven Dickens 3 on Twitter, Steven Dickens on LinkedIn, futurumresearch.com, pretty much all those places. Always happy to engage in a DM and have a conversation with people. So, you know, if people want to interact with this LinkedIn post and sort of get those, more than happy to engage.
Awesome. Good stuff, Steven. As always, it's always a joy to talk to you and learn today about that big deal mindset. Good stuff, man. Thanks, buddy.
Fantastic. Cheers, Phil. Let's make it not such a long time next time.
Absolutely. That sounds good to me.